So, moving on today, we are members of the South Island Sea Kayak Association. Welcome, Sara Ellison, Dr. Sara Ellison. And we also have some other invited guests here, the scuba divers, the snorkelers, and the mermaids. Any other group I'm missing out on? No. We all have a share of love of the water. The kayakers routinely get their faces wet, whether by rain or waves or the occasional oops. We all love looking into the water, looking at the sea stars, the jellyfish, or whatever swims below us. The scuba divers dress in warm and hopefully watertight clothing, don heavy air tanks, and explore the depths, while the snorkelers wear form-fitting rubber suits, usually, but not always, and quietly explore the more shallow parts of the waters. And collectively, we all have shared experiences in the waters. But that's not why we're here. We all have one other shared experience that we all hope will eventually go away, and that's COVID. Our tale is about Dr. Sara Ellison, professor of astronomy at University of Victoria, and her exploits during the time of COVID. By the way, she puts on an excellent first-year astronomy course if you want to further your education. And just to play up on her academics, it's a rather impressive resume. Lots of awards, and I believe you studied with a couple of rather notable scientists? Yes, okay. One of her occupational tasks is to do research and to attend various conferences. And part of this involved working at one of the great observatories in the world in Chile, and probably been other places to work with various astronomical equipment. Prior to COVID, that took Sara all over the world, and she would occasionally go to the local beach and go for a swim. Anyways, as many of us during COVID, we had various restrictions on us, and one of those was we couldn't travel far, and we needed to wear the Bonnie Henry prescribed masks. Well, Sara, being the clever type, opted for an alt mask. And this is where her tale starts. So, welcome, Sara.
A very kind introduction. I feel like I wanted to share with you one anecdote that I don't normally share in snorkeling talks, just because Roger alluded to brushing shoulders with famous astrophysicists. I did my PhD in Cambridge, and as all students in Cambridge, I got everywhere by bike. And one evening, after a very long day of trying to solve the mysteries of the universe, I was cycling hard home, and I almost killed Stephen Hawking. I was inches away from his wheelchair, but in my defense, he was on the wrong side. It was all his fault. Okay, so thank you very much to Fred and to Roger for a very kind introduction. It's somewhat strange to be giving a talk to a kayaking association, because you folks normally try and stay out of the water, whereas I am actively trying to put my face in the waves. But as we heard in the introduction, we're actually a motley crew tonight, everything from cold water swimmers, snorkelers, scuba divers, kayakers, all of us who are out there to enjoy the cold waters of the Pacific Northwest in all of its forms. So as Roger alluded to in his introduction, my love affair with snorkeling really got going during COVID. And so I want to sort of briefly tell you about how I got here, because it's really one of the first questions that anybody asks me when they see me coming out of the water, like, why on earth would you think of doing this? So as you can probably tell by my accent, I am originally from the UK, and I moved here with my then boyfriend, now husband, in 2003. It's hard to get my head around the fact that I've been in Canada now for over 20 years. So we were living in Chile at the time. My husband's also an astronomer. We were working at some of the biggest observatories in the world down there. They're located in the high Atacama Desert, which is superb for stargazing. But then we both got offered jobs at the University of Victoria, so we moved our lives up the west coast from Chile to here on Vancouver Island. And so we arrived in August 2003, and I still remember very clearly one of the very first weekends we were here. It was a lovely, sunny August weekend, and we borrowed a couple of bikes. We were we were renting an apartment in Rockland at the time, and so we did a nice bike ride all along the coast down to Oak Bay. And we got to the beach down there, and we thought this is going to be perfect for a swim. Lovely sunny day. We were slightly warm after our long bike ride, and so we started sort of peeling off our layers, getting ready to go for a dip. And I don't know if I really kind of recalled at the time that there was no one else in the water. As my husband was sort of sprinting Baywatch style down Estevan Beach towards the shallows, but we soon found out why there was no one else in the water. We were newbies on the island. You folks are all veterans, so you know, of course, the water here, even in the summertime, is rather chilly. I think, you know, British machismo dictated that we stay in for at least a minute before we retreated back to the beach, almost hypothermic. So if you had told me then that being in the ocean here would be such a big part of my life, I think I probably would have laughed you off the beach. Okay, fast forward 5 or so years, we now have an extra little person in tow, and we've bought a small cottage on Saturna Island, which is one of the Gulf Islands. And we enjoy being out on the water in our kayaks, on our paddleboards, but we've never really thought about swimming. But again, it's a sunny August afternoon, and my husband decides that we should give snorkeling a go. We've been keen tropical snorkelers our entire adult life, and so we decide, well, you know, why not? We'll give it a go, because after all, we have these surf wetsuits, these sort of 5mm wetsuits with hoods and gloves. We should be just fine in the water, not a repeat of our earlier swimsuit-only excursion. So we get dressed up, and if any of you know Saturna Island, there's a section called Cliffside, which the clue is in the name. It's a sheer cliff, and it's a fairly low bank, so you can just jump in, but the wall just goes straight down, so it's perfect just for jumping off. So we're all suited up, we're ready to go, and we're literally about to step off the cliff into the water when one of the friends that we're with says, "Wait, I see a fin." And with that, all of J-Pod literally swim by right below. So that was you know, the moments before my first cold water snorkeling here. So we waited for the August to pass by before we jumped in. My experience in the water was almost as breathtaking as seeing all of those orcas swim past, because that section of cliff is just covered with anemones, huge anemones. But my impression was short-lived, because even in this wetsuit, I was still shivering after about 5 minutes, and so I quickly retreated, and that was that. And I thought, well, this is not really going to be something that I'm repeating. Okay, fast forward again to March 2020. I'm sure we all remember all of those cancelled plans. We were meant to be going off that May to the Great Barrier Reef in Australia to go swim with manta rays, and of course that didn't happen. And so I sat down and had a good hard think about how I was going to have travels and adventures when we really couldn't go very far. And so I cast my mind back to that plunge into the ocean at Cliffside, and I thought, well, maybe there is more to this, and I just have to figure it out. Maybe I have to figure out, you know, what to wear to stay warm, and I also have to figure out where to go, because there's a lot of coastline, and not all coastline is created equal. And I also wanted to learn more about all of the critters that I knew were down there. And so these were the 3 questions that were in my mind when I started this COVID project. It didn't even really start out as a deliberate project. This is what happens when scientists get hobbies. They just get a bit obsessed and they start gathering data, and then soon these data turn into logs. And then at some point, the spouse says, "You could probably write a book about it." so these were the three questions that were on my mind, and they're the three questions that I get asked all the time as well. So this is what we're going to go through tonight. What will you see if you decide to take the plunge? If you decide to take the plunge, what should you wear to stay nice and warm? Because it is possible. And thirdly, where do you go to get to see all of this good stuff? All right, so let's dive straight in. No pun intended. Okay, so your best friend in learning about all of the great marine life that you're going to see if you go snorkeling is to have a good field guide. And there are many out there on the market. These are my two personal favorites. They're nice complements to one another. So on the left, by Rick Harlow, these are both local authors, local to Vancouver Island, not local to Victoria, is Whelks to Whales. This is a very nice, handy, kind of almost pocket-sized guide. It's softback, it's got lots of nice glossy color photos in it, and many of the most common species that you will see, both vertebrates, invertebrates, mammals, are in that nice handy guide. If you are a very serious species identifier slash critter obsessive, the book on the right is the one for you. The Big Green Book by Andy Lamb and Bernard Hanby. This thing is a brick. It's large format, it's hardback, it's about 2 inches thick. You can use it as a doorstop. But it has pretty much any species that you're going to encounter, all the way from seaweeds to whales and everything in between. So these are my two recommendations if you're wanting to learn more about our marine life. Okay, so let's take a look at just a few of the species that you can see in our waters. And I've split these up into a few different categories. We're going to start off with the sea anemones. Sea anemones are really wonderful to see whether you're a beginner or an experienced scuba diver. There are many different species. They're extremely colorful. Many of them are quite large as well. So very nice eye candy. This is one of my personal favorites, the rose anemone. You see the rose anemone more around the outer coast, so sort of in the Souk area. It likes slightly more current and surge-rich environments. It always has this beautiful, deep, let me just turn on my pointer here. Always has this beautiful, deep red-colored trunk, but the tentacles can either be in this sort of yellow color or in a deep red. And for a reason that I've never understood, often you see them in pairs like this, with a yellow one next to a red one. I do not know why. The alternative moniker, and I'm not going to try to use the Latin, scientific Latin names tonight, just the common names. The alternative common name for the rose anemone is the fish-eating anemone, which is a very apt name. Like many anemones, the rose anemone has a significant sting in its tentacles, which you will feel if you try to stroke these with your bare hands. And so they use this sting to paralyze prey, such as small fish that come past, and then draw them into their mouths. I have a bit of a fetish with taking pictures of anemone mouth parts. I feel like they're just almost these sort of sci-fi-like structures that are going to swallow things up, and sometimes it's actually fun to pick up a mussel or something and just like pop it into the mouth and watch it gobble it up. Okay, next up is the painted anemone. People will often confuse the painted anemone with the rose anemone because they have somewhat similar coloration. But the painted anemone has much shorter and stubbier tentacles and always has this strong banding around them. But apart from that, they can come in a range of different color morphs and patterns. Sometimes they have the same just deep red trunk as the rose anemone. Sometimes they come in this nice mottled color. So those are two examples of anemones that have this sort of trunk morphology. but many anemones actually like to bury themselves into the sandy or the shady bottom. And this is one such example. So this is the so-called stubby rose anemone. They're both the same species, again, just two different color morphs. And then this is the other burrowing anemone that you'll commonly see. One of its common names is just burrowing anemone, but I prefer the alternative common name, which is the moonglow anemone. I think this is a very fitting, sort of ethereal, whimsical name for this very beautiful anemone. These ones are often quite small, just a few inches across, but they really do have this glow to them. And again, you'll see them in a few different color morphs. These are the two most common ones, either a beige color or this kind of lime green. And oftentimes when you see anemones that are green like this, it's not because the green is their natural color, it's because they have symbiotic algae living inside them, and it's the algae that give them that green color. And that is also true for this guy, the green surf anemone. So in contrast to the moonglows, which are quite small, these green surf anemones, also called the giant surf anemone, these can be really quite big. They can be up to a foot across. Often they're buried. They like to be wedged into cracks in the rock. But sometimes you get to see them standing tall, and again, their trunks can be a good foot or so. Like all anemones, the green surf anemone is carnivorous because it's a bigger animal. It can take bigger prey. I've even heard reports of it eating an entire seagull. Yeah, I'm assuming the seagull was already dead when it floated past. I can't imagine it sort of, reaching his tentacles up to grab the seagull. But anyway, it gives you a sense of the size of some of these anemones. And from then, the very big back to one of the smaller kinds, the brooding anemone. So anemones, different anemones, when we have many tens of different species, I'm just showing you a small selection here, they have different breeding strategies, different reproductive strategies. But the brooding anemone is quite unique. So its young are fertilized inside its mouth, which is in the top. And then when the babies are ready, they crawl out of the mouth of the mother and they make their way down to her trunk, and they huddle around the trunk and they mature there for a short while until they're ready to wiggle off into the big wide world. And so it's really just this species of anemone that has this sort of maternal strategy with its young. So if you ever see these guys, they're very obvious with their stripy tops and their stripy trunks. Always take a look underneath and see if there's a little brooding nursery there. All right, next up are sea stars. So arguably, sea stars and anemones are the two main sort of animal groups that people know about in the intertidal zone. And like the anemones, we have many tens of species here in the Pacific Northwest. Lots of different colors and sizes. This is the one that is probably the most common if you've ever been tide pooling, or if when you've been out on your kayak excursions, you've been out at low tide. This is the ochre star. Here in the South Island, around Victoria, it's the purple variety that you tend to see most commonly, often in very large aggregations, many tens or even hundreds of these animals together. But as you move up into the Strait of Georgia, you tend to see more of this pink color variety. And if you go the other way and go out the west coast, up sort of Souk and towards Berkeley Sound, it's the orange kind that you tend to see more often. So these are the three main color varieties that we see. In this photo on the right, you can see that this particular animal is up on its tippy toes. If you ever see a sea star doing this, it is getting ready to spawn. So the way that the sea stars reproduce is they stand up on their tippy toes, they release their gametes from their armpits, so if you catch them at exactly the right moment, you can sometimes see kind of wispy white clouds coming out from their armpits, and that's them releasing the eggs and the sperm into the water column, and then they'll fertilize in the water column at large. The other very common one that is often confused with the ochre star is the mottled star. Again, it comes in lots of different colors. I've shown you just 3 varieties here, an orange, a brown, and a blue one. These, as I said, are often confused with the ochre star, but there are a few ways that you can tell the difference. So first of all, the arms or the rays on these are much more long and tapering, whereas in the ochre star they're a bit more short and stubby. In the ochre star, these white patterns, they're actually quite elevated from the skin, so they're almost a little bit spiny, whereas in the mottled stars, they're flat. They have those same white patterns, but they're flat to the skin. Okay, next up, I'll briefly talk about the leather star. So along with the ochre star and the mottled star, this is probably the other very, very common one. I see this, I think, every time I snorkel. I mean, it's everywhere. The leather star's claim to fame is that if you stroke it, it smells of garlic. Apparently. I don't know. I have never verified this because I've always got, a snorkel mask on my face. So I've never been able to sniff it. But apparently, if you give it a little tickle, it smells of garlic. Right next to it, this is a bat star. I've taken this photo of these two side by side because people will often confuse these two. And you can see why. They're similar size, they have a similar shape, this sort of webbed structure between their arms. But whereas the leather star is always this color, it's almost always, it's sort of this tan, sometimes with a hint of blue, with these salmon-colored speckles on. The bat star never has this coloration. The bat star is usually either this uniform grey or a uniform kind of rust color, sometimes mottled between the two, but never this coloration. The other way to know whether you're looking at the leather star or bat star, apart from tickling and seeing whether it smells of garlic, is you will not see a bat star around Victoria. These are an outer west coast speciality. My laptop keeps freezing. So the furthest south I've ever seen a bat star is at Pachena Bay, which is just south of Barkey Sound, just south of the Broken Group. And then you'll see them onwards further up the west coast than that. So if you're around Victoria, if you're around Nanaimo, anywhere on the east coast really, you are not seeing a bat star. This is possibly one of my favorite sea stars. This is the cushion star. I have a soft spot for this because it looks so kind of fat and plushy and cuddly, but you really wouldn't want to give a cushion star a cuddle because its alternative name is the slime star. So if you touch a cushion star, if you try to pick up a cushion star, it will ooze enormous amounts of mucus as part of its defense mechanism. So it's a kind of look but don't cuddle kind of sea star. So all of the sea stars that I've shown you so far have all had 5 arms, and that is maybe our typical picture of what a sea star looks like. But not all sea stars have 5 arms. So this is a picture of a so-called giant pink star. This one normally has 5 arms, but in this picture, it's sprouting an extra 2 arms here. So this demonstrates one of the fantastical abilities of sea stars, which is that they can regenerate lost limbs. So if in an attack, they've had some accident, they lose an arm, or even several arms, or even all of their arms, as long as the central disc is still intact, they can regrow those limbs. In this case, this giant pink star has all its 5 limbs, so I don't really know why it's decided to grow these extra 2 arms. But hey, I guess if you have the ability to grow extra arms, why not? Why not? But other sea stars naturally have more than 5 arms. So these are the various types of sun stars. One of the more common ones that we see in our waters, and certainly around Victoria, so if you go to the breakwater, for example, down at Ogden Point, these are the striped sun stars. Again, they come in lots of different colors, but they all have this very characteristic, strong blue stripe that runs all the way from the central disk out to the tippy ends of the arms. This one is called the rose star. I don't actually see this one terribly often. It likes to live in slightly deeper water, but it's always a treat when I do get to see it because everyone is different. I always think this should be called the snowflake star or something, both because it has this kind of feathered appearance to it, a bit like a snowflake, but again, because every single one has this slightly different pattern, usually some combination of pinks, whites, reds, and grays in some kind of radial pattern, a real pretty one. This is the northern sun star, and the reason I chose this photo to show you is I want you to see how the ends of its arms are curled slightly upwards. So most sea star species actually have eyes at the end of their arms. So they're not compound eyes like our own, they're clusters of simple cells. But they're enough to be light sensitive, and experiments that marine biologists have done have figured out that it's enough for them to find their way around their reef. If you move them away from their reef, they can find their way back to their favorite spots. And so whenever I see a sea star with its arms curled up like this, I always like to imagine that it's looking at me like I'm looking at it. We're having kind of an interspecies moment. And then last but not least for the sea stars is the sunflower star. This particular species holds a special place in many people's hearts. It is the largest sea star in the world. The size can be up to 1 meter across. It can have up to 30 arms. Each individual has its own different number. There isn't really a fixed number. It can be up to 30. It is the fastest moving sea star in the world as well. It can move at the breakneck pace of 1 meter a minute, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually very impressive. If you hang around and watch one for a while, they really do move across the seafloor. But the reason why I think they have a special place in many of our hearts is because they underwent a massive tragedy a few years ago. So many of you may remember the sea star wasting disease from around a decade ago. We saw it most readily on the ochre star species, the very first one that I showed you, because those ones we see very commonly in the intertidal zone. So those were the ones for many beachcombers and kayakers as well, where people could really just see them melting, disintegrating. They became zombie sea stars, this viral disease that wiped out so many individuals. Not all species of sea stars were affected by the wasting disease, but the sunflower star was very, very badly decimated. It's estimated that 1 billion sunflower stars died in the wasting disease. I mean, it's an incredible number if you think about it. So they have somewhat recovered. They're definitely not as common as they used to be, but we're very lucky around here. We still get to see them. If you're much further south than here, so if you head down towards Oregon, for example, you just don't see them down there anymore. Vancouver Island is really about the southernmost extent of their range now, but we do still get to see them. So that's very heartwarming. Okay, next on to nudibranchs. If you don't know what a nudibranch is yet, your life is about to be changed forever. Okay, so nudibranchs are sea slugs, but I think the name sea slug just doesn't do justice to the incredible beauty and wonder that is this set of animals. So once you start scuba diving and snorkeling, you very quickly become nudibranch obsessed. So I'm just going to take you through a few of the many, many species that we can see around here. So I'm starting off with one of the smallest and one of the biggest. So there are actually many tiny nudibranchs, so this is just one of the very small ones. So this branch dendronotid This particular one I saw in Telegraph Cove, which is not far from here. It was on a piece of seaweed. It was very difficult to photograph. This is probably one of about 100 pictures that I took. It was tiny, I mean, maybe 3 or 4 millimeters across. Really, really tiny. Contrast that with this orange peel nudibranch, which is one of the largest species in the world. It can grow up to a foot long. So this is just to give you that sense of scale range that we can find. So the name nudibranch means naked gills. And so the defining feature of nudibranchs is they have their gills, their breathing apparatus on the outside. But it's in different places for different species. So for example, on this diamondback tritonia, it's these little tufts that you can see along each side on its back. This leopard dorid, it's the big white fluffy thing on its bum. We call that the branchial plume, so that's how it's doing its breathing. So all nudibranchs have this external gill somewhere. This is the point in the presentation where I get to make fun of my dear friend Maureen, who is my favorite snorkel buddy and who comes to almost every talk that I give. And she's always very patient with me. When we go snorkeling, Maureen will often wave at me and say, Sara, I found a nudibranch. And I'll say, great, what kind? And she'll say, it's the yellow one. So I have been gradually training Maureen to tell the difference between the 3 common yellow types of nudibranchs we have. And so I'm going to give you the same lesson. All right, the most common of the 3 that we see in the shallows here is this one on the right. This is called the Monterey dorid. It's typically an inch or 2 long. Its defining feature is, so it has this very bumpy skin. These bumps are called tubercles. And on the Monterey dorid, some of those tubercles are dark brown or black. So when you see those dirty tubercles, you know you have a Monterey dorid. The noble sea lemon is probably the next most common. These are quite a lot bigger. They're usually sort of 4, maybe even 5 inches. They have quite a different shape. They're really domed. They also have a dark coloration on their skin, but not on the tubercles. So you can see the bumpy bits are all pale, but the dark patches are all on the skin itself. So that's your noble sea lemon. And then the least common of the 3, and I think for many people the trickiest one to identify, is the heath dorid. So it has those black freckles, so people will often think it's a Monterey dorid, but these black freckles are on the skin and not on the tubercles. Okay, so there you go. There may be a test at the end. Okay, here are 2 more lovely nudibranchs. In these ones, you can see the shape is very different to the dorids that I just showed you that have very flat shapes. These 2 have got these long, plume-like structures all over their body that are called serrata. So these serrata have a few different functions. The first function is that many nudibranchs like to eat the stinging cells at the end of the tentacles of anemones. And they eat those stinging cells and they keep them in their digestive system, which runs along the length of the serrata, so that if anything comes and tries to have a nibble at them, they just get a mouthful of nasty, stinging taste. So that's one of the purposes of these serrata. The other purpose is that if the nudibranch feels under threat, it can actually shed the serrata and leave it wiggling around as a decoy. Okay, this cockerel's dorid, this pair of cockerel's dorids, is demonstrating another fascinating feature of the nudibranch, which is that they are hermaphroditic, which means they have both male and female sex organs. So those sex organs are on the right side of their body, so this is the head of one, this is the head of another. And so when you see them lining up head to tail like this, it's because they're getting ready for some nudibranch romancing. And so you'll quite often see nudibranchs in pairs like this, mated head to tail. And then the last one I'm going to show you is the so-called giant nudibranch. This one is very special because it's one of the few types of nudibranch that you don't just see crawling around on the seafloor or a rock or a piece of seaweed. You can sometimes actually see it swimming. So here it is when it's cruising around on the seafloor. Again, these are quite big. They can be 10, 12 inches long, as the name implies. They're quite big. And here you have one that is swimming. And when you see them swimming, it's a full body, it's like a flamenco dancer moving through the water column. So I always have to remind myself when I'm snorkeling, not just to look down, but sometimes to remember to look up, because there are very often good things to see in the water column itself, including lots of different types of jellies. I'm not going to go through jellies individually. I'm just going to show you this one compilation. Many people are afraid of being in the water with jellies. We're very lucky here that most of the varieties of jellies in our water don't sting. The main exception is the lion's mane jelly, which I actually don't have a picture of. The sea nettle also has a sting, but you don't see this one very often. The vast majority of jellies are totally harmless, and you're going to be in a wetsuit for the most part anyway, so you really don't have to worry when you encounter jellies. We have, again, such a variety of them. This one is one of the tiniest that you'll see. It's maybe half a centimeter big. I like to call this one the brain in the bell jar. And then some that are really massive. So the fried egg jellies and the sea nettles and the lion's mane, they can have tentacles that are several meters long. I'm not very good with fish. We have lots of different fish species. For some reason, I don't have the patience for learning lots of different fish names, but we do have a lot of fish, and they're often very, very brightly colored. One of the most famous that people like to see is the rock greenling, but we have, say, many different species, the painted greenling as well. The red Irish lord is always a favorite as well, this kind of bright red color. But sometimes they're also extremely well camouflaged. So this Habazon was huge, I mean, like this kind of size, huge head, ugly guy. And he was sat on this rock and allowed me to go right up to him because he was so confident in his camouflage that he was convinced I couldn't see him. Same for the buffalo sculpin, which again, you can probably barely make out. So he's really colorful. He's often got this bright pink color. But because the rocks have pink coralline algae on them as well, they're really well camouflaged. We get big schools of bait fish, such as herring, which are a joy to swim through. And this guy, I saw my first one ever just a few weeks ago. This is a grunt sculpin, which again is a favorite of many people. I could go on all night. There are just so many things to see, but thankfully I'm not going to go all night. But there are so many things to see. I've really just scratched the surface. Another of my favorites, the Puget Sound king crab. We just start to see those at this time of year. They're coming up from the deep to mate in the shallows. We have corals, amazing feather duster worms. So much to see. But of course, one thing that we all love to see is octopus. We have a few different species. This is a giant Pacific octopus. Scuba divers, I cannot tell you how many times scuba divers have told me, oh, you won't see octopus because they're not in the shallows. This one I saw, I was on the surface when I took this photo. It was just sitting on the rocks, a couple of feet below me, just hanging out, and also several times I've seen them like this, just curled up on a kelp stipe. So again, I took this, basically from the surface. This was just in Gonzales Bay. So yes, we get to see all of these things, even in the top 5 meters or so. All right, so those are some of the amazing things that you can see. So now you're all psyched up and motivated and you want to go get in the water, but you're remembering that I told you how cold I was at the beginning of the talk. And so figuring out what gear you need to stay warm and safe in the water, just like when you're kayaking, right? You want to make sure you're dressed for your activity. This actually took a fair bit of research to figure this out. So I'm going to share the kind of the fruits of my labor with you. So the good news is, unlike when I started doing this back in 2020, we now actually have a dedicated store in town that sells exactly the gear that you need. It is east to west freediving down on Viscard Street. So the folks down there are really knowledgeable and very lovely and generous, and they have suits that you can try on and they'll advise you. They even have kids suits, so all shapes and sizes. They have something for everyone. If you really strike out with them, the other alternative I would suggest is diving sports. Although it's in Vancouver, they have an excellent website. They will advise you on the phone about sizing, and they have very good flat rate shipping as well. So that's the other opportunity. But I want to sort of also take this opportunity to do a little bit of show and tell to show you my gear, because it is a little bit different from what you're used to seeing from surf wetsuits. So let's get this in here. Have the lights, that would be great. Okay, so wetsuits. Many people will happily snorkel in a 5 mil wetsuit. And if you're snorkeling in the summer, in say the Saanich Inlet or in the Strait of Georgia, where the water temperature can be 17, 18 degrees, then you're probably fine. If you want to do this year round, or if like me, you're a total cold water wimp, you probably want something a bit thicker. And so this is what I'm going to show you now. So there's a special kind of suit that freedivers and cold water wimpy snorkelers use. And it's special for a few reasons. First of all, it's much thicker, so it's 7 millimeters. Second, it's made of a special type of neoprene called open cell, which I'll explain in a minute. And thirdly, it's not just a single suit, it comes in 2 pieces. Here's my suit. So the first piece is your Farmer John / Farmer Jane. And then the second piece is the jacket that goes over top, and it has an integrated hood. So these features mean, first, you have a double thickness of neoprene over your core, because you've got the Farmer Jane and the top. So this is nominally 7 mils, so now I have 14 millimeters of rubbery goodness over my core. The integrated hood, so one of the things that I found when I had my 5 mil surf suit, I had a hood like tucked in, was my husband and I used to refer to it as the flush, right? You jump into the water and all the cold water kind of comes down your neck and blah. Because this is integrated, you don't get that. And in fact, whilst this is not completely waterproof, it's not a dry suit, if I'm in the water for less than half an hour, which almost never happens, I will still be dry underneath this when I come out, so they're quite watertight. So that's the design, that's the thickness. The other key thing, as I said, is the type of neoprene that it is. So this open cell means, and you're welcome to come and take a look at this afterwards, this open cell means that you have a raw rubber right next to your skin. So closed cell is what you have on the outside. Closed cell is what you're used to seeing on other wetsuits, where you have a thin layer of nylon or polyester, some kind of fabric, over the top of the neoprene, which protects it and makes it robust, so you don't snag it with your fingernails, you don't snag it on rocks. Open cell is when you just have the raw rubber. And the rule of thumb is that when you have open cell, it's worth an extra 2 millimeters of thickness compared to the closed cell, because it forms kind of a suction with your body, because you have all the little bubbles in the neoprene that kind of stick to your core. So these are really nice and toasty. So in the summer time, I basically never get cold. In the wintertime, when the temperature is down in the single digits, I can still last happily for an hour or so, no problem. And then, of course, you'll have some kind of neoprene socks. You don't get sweaty when you're snorkeling. And gloves, but these are just, there's nothing special about these. Okay, so that's the main outerwear that you need to get started. So with this, you're pretty much set to go. But there's a next, I'll take questions at the end. The next thing that you might want, once you've been in a few times with this setup, is one of these. So with all of this neoprene, you're very warm, but you're also very floaty. In fact, it is basically impossible to sink in this, even if you want to. Even if you want to try and swim down, you will not be able to. It'll be very funny for your buddy to try and watch you as you try to swim down and you just pop back up like a cork. So when you're a beginner, this is actually very nice because you just float like a cork on the surface. But at some point, you might decide you want to swim down to take a closer look at something, or you might want to become more serious and get into freediving, and that's where these weight belts come into play. So you just wear them around your waist. I don't have time to go into all of the subtleties about how you figure out how much weight you need. Suffice to say, too much weight is a bad thing. So just very, very quickly, the way that you can figure out how much weight you need, you go to the store and you buy small denominations of lead, you go to the beach, nice sandy beach, you get in your suit, you walk out, and you stay vertical, and you breathe out. And when you breathe out, you're reducing your buoyancy because you're breathing out the air in your lungs. It's contributing to your buoyancy. So you will sink a bit. And when you sink, so you're vertical in the water, when you sink, you want your nose to still be above the waterline. Okay? If when you breathe out, your chin is still above the waterline, okay, you can go back to the beach, put on another couple of pounds, go out, try again. So you do it little by little, because you do not want to be overweighted. Okay, so now if you have your weight belt, and now you want to swim down, then you probably want some fins. So I actually snorkeled for several years without any fins whatsoever. I was happy just kind of bobbing on the surface, moving around really slowly. But having fins is actually a good idea because if there's any significant current, or if you really want to move any significant distance, just doing this with your feet, I mean, unless you're a really good swimmer, is very, very slow and inefficient. So I started off with a pair of just like basic plastic scuba fins, very cheap. I think I got them from Costco. Those served me well for several years until I indulged my inner mermaid fetish. So these are freediving fins, so they're just much longer than a scuba fin. I really don't need these. Like, these are for people who want to swim down like 20, 30 plus meters. That is not me. But I just, like, you just feel like a mermaid when you swim with these. So that's what I say. This is my total indulgence. You can buy these in plastic. You can buy them in fiberglass. You can buy them in carbon fiber. That is the progression of both performance and price. Many people love their plastic fins. My husband swears by his plastic fins. I'm a small person. I found the plastic fins kind of heavy. So these ones are carbon fiber, which is why they're kind of like a didgeridoo. Yeah, at some point you may want to put a pair of these on your all right, so that is it for gear. So the last section that I'm going to wrap up with, so you can probably put the lights back down again now.
Did you bring your mask?
I do have my mask. I'm happy to show you. It's just like a very ordinary snorkel mask, and the same with the snorkel. Nothing, I'm happy to show you afterwards, but nothing fancy. It's not a freediving mask or anything like that. Okay, so the last section that I'm going to talk about is where to go. Because, oh dear, I think I've broken the mic stand. I'm just going to lay that down. Because one of the things that I discovered very quickly was you can't just walk in at any old beach and expect to see all of this good stuff. So for example, if it's a very sandy beach, like if you go to Willows Beach, it's lovely for swimming, but that's not where the critters live. So in my book, I have a list of about 50 destinations. I probably snorkeled at more like 200. So I always had to kiss a lot of frogs before I found the princes. And so I've compiled about the 50 best destinations, in my opinion, around Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. And they're organized into 5 chapters. So I'm just going to give you my top kind of reasons to go to each of these 5 areas around Vancouver Island, plus my special kayak tips for those same regions. So we'll start out with Greater Victoria. So my first reason to be snorkeling around the Greater Victoria area is quite simply, I can do it after work. I mean, how lucky are we that we can roll out of our houses and be at any one of a dozen great snorkel locations within a half-hour drive. I feel like we're very lucky to have all of this incredible opportunity right on our doorstep, right here in the provincial capital. My second reason to be snorkeling in this area is because in the summertime, as kayakers, you may well have experienced this from your kayaks, that in the Saanich Inlet in the summertime, we get fantastic bioluminescence. It's wonderful to kayak through, it's even better to snorkel through. And so really any of a number of entries in the Saanich Inlet is great for that. And then my third reason to be snorkeling in Greater Victoria, the one that I've chosen, is to be able to swim through kelp forest. This is the kind of thing you see on David Attenborough documentaries, right? You know, all of the wildlife that you see that lives in the kelp forest, that has this as its habitat. Everything from the small fry through fish, otters, seals, sea lions, you can see it all. And we have a lovely kelp forest right on our doorstep at Ogden Point. And then in terms of my kind of top suggestion for kayak snorkel locations, because you guys have an extra way to enjoy the ocean that people who are just stuck with using their cars don't have access to, is again within the inlet, in particular in the Todd Inlet, easily approached if you launch at Brentwood Bay, as I'm sure many of you have paddled, probably all of you have paddled in the inlet, so you know it's usually very protected, so protected from the wind, protected from currents, it's very easy paddling. There are several nice kind of options for shallow beach landings, but from the snorkel perspective, one of the things that's great here, in addition to the bioluminescence, is that in the summertime you can get these incredible blooms of jellyfish. And so again, these are totally harmless, so you can enjoy floating on the surface amongst thousands of jellies, and again, feel like you're in an episode of Blue Planet. Okay, the second section in my book is about the outer west coast. So this is probably where I spend most of my time snorkeling. I probably spend more of my time snorkeling along the East Sioux coastline than I do even in town. It's wilderness on our doorstep, right? You can be from here to East Sioux in 45 minutes if the traffic is friendly. And yet it's a whole other world in terms of the wildlife that you will see. So I've already mentioned bat stars and the green surf anemones as surf lovers. The other one is the rainbow star, which you can see here. So many of these species thrive in the more vibrant conditions that we get in the Juan de Fuca Strait. So in terms of kayaking, my top tip is a spot that I like to call the Pechena Bay Islets. So just to orient you, so here is Bamfield. This is Pechena Bay, where there is a lovely First Nations campsite. If you haven't been there, it's a really fantastic place just to go camp. And then you can launch from this beach. It's about 2 kilometers paddle out to the tip here. And beyond this, it's like next stop Japan. So, you're on really the edge of the world, but right in here, there's this protected area that's out of the worst of the surf and sun. You still have to pick a fairly calm day. And these islets here are fantastic. So we usually kayak out, we beach our kayaks here, and then we swim out and snorkel along here. There's fantastic wildlife watching all in the bay here. Sometimes whales will come in and they'll be lunge feeding and bubble net feeding in the bay here. We almost always see bears on the coast. You have to be careful you don't leave your lunch unattended. And you'll get all the kind of classic West Coast scenes, so piles and piles of ochre stars, green surf anemones, bat stars, all around just this really small islet. Okay, the third of the 5 geographic sections spans from Cowichan to Comox, so moving up the Strait of Georgia. Starting around this time of year, the water visibility in this part of the island can become spectacular. So one of the big challenges of snorkeling in the Pacific Northwest is the visibility. I won't lie to you, sometimes you get in and it's just like pea soup. But in the Strait of Georgia, in the fall and the winter, you can get visibility that feels almost tropical. The temperature doesn't feel tropical, but you can see for tens of meters on a good day. In contrast, in the summer, it really does warm up, and so many people find that they can snorkel in a 5 mil suit with no hood and gloves, or even in a shorty, or even for these crazy cold water swimmers, you can comfortably in there for half an hour or more. And then my other kind of top reason to go snorkeling in this spot is for a fantastic wreck snorkel. So snorkeling or being around shipwrecks is not just for scuba divers. So at Royston, there are about a dozen deliberately scuttled ships of various types that are covered with all of this life, lots of anemones and sea stars. And this is actually also a fantastic kayak option. It's not a long or demanding outing, but you can do, so here's Royston, here's the zoom in, and then the wrecks stretch all the way out along this natural breakwater. So here's a picture of above. So if you don't fancy snorkeling, it's actually just I almost always see kayakers kayaking around these wrecks. In addition to the anemones and the sea stars, one of the kind of signature species that you'll see at the Royston wrecks are these huge moon snails. I mean, they can be this kind of big. They're really quite monstrous. Okay, 4th out of 5 is the Gulf Islands. So one reason to head out to the Gulf Islands is, despite how much we all love to complain about BC ferries, we are actually very lucky to have this whole archipelago that we can get to with fairly easy transit. So in the summertime, easy day trips to any one of a number of Gulf Islands. From the snorkeling perspective, I'm going to pick out 2 highlights. One is a couple of locations where you can go and see huge colonies of giant anemones. I'll show you a photo in just a second. My 2 personal favorite spots. One is on Pender Island, a place called Tilly Point, and the other is Cliffside, where I started my story with you this evening, which is on the south side of Saturna. And then my 3rd reason, I like to go every year to Pender Island to a spot called Peter Cove, because the nudibranchs there are just fantastic. Here is a red dendronotid. These guys are quite big. I only have ever seen these at Peter Cove, so I like to kind of make a pilgrimage every year to go look for these guys. So what about kayaking trips around the Gulf Islands? Well, if you are an able and adventurous kayaker, there are some excellent multi-day opportunities to go tripping and camping around the Gulf Islands. But if you want to make it an easier endeavor, you can just take the ferry to Saturna. So Saturna is the undiscovered gem of the southern Gulf Islands. I probably shouldn't say this because now it's going to get overrun. But there is actually a direct ferry. Not all the ferries are direct, but many of them are if you time them properly. And then if you head to the east side of the island, There is a national parks campsite called Naves Bay. There is a bit of a walk in, so if you've got kayaks, having wheels or a trolley is a good idea. But when you're there, there's a lovely campsite. And then here, this is called Echo Bay. This is really the name the locals give it. You don't really see this on maps, but this is called Echo Bay. And this spot is in my book, and it is just full of these giant plumose anemones. And if you kayak, so they're all here along this edge. So this is eminently swimmable, it's a few hundred meters. Very easy kayak. And if you go at low tide, these guys are above the waterline. So again, you don't even have to get into the water if you don't want to. And then if you want a more ambitious paddle out of Naves Bay, you can head across towards East Point. So this is cliffside here. It's very dramatic. As you heard me say at the beginning of the talk, this is where the southern resident pods will often pass by in the summer. Really wonderful paddle. For more experienced paddlers, because there can be very strong currents along here, so be aware of that. And then last but not least is the North Island. So I'm embarrassed to say that despite my 20 years on the island, it wasn't until COVID that I actually went past Campbell River. But now I am hooked. The North Island, I mean, not just for snorkeling, but the North Island is sheer magic. But certainly for being in the water. Again, I make an annual pilgrimage up to Port Hardy. Again, in the fall and the winter, you get fantastic visibility. But really one of the main reasons I go every year is to see these guys. So this is a basket star. It's technically not a sea star. Technically it's a British star, but you know, I'm not pedantic. These are like mythical to me because they have these ever-branching arms that are like a fractal Medusa or something. Even scuba divers get super excited when they find these because they are not common. And even when you find them, they tend to be, as a scuba diver, they tend to be quite deep, tens and tens of meters deep. But I found several places up in the North Island, actually I'm waving my pointer on place here, these three, where I find these basket stars in as little as 3 meters of water. So every year I like to go up and visit with my basket stars. And amazingly, I swear they're in the same place every year. I don't think they move very far, so I always find them. And then the third reason to go up to the North Island is to visit this very famous spot called Browning Wall, which is number, I can't quite make it, 52? But anyway, whatever this bubble is, I don't have my glasses on, 51. Browning Wall is famous in scuba diving circles. It was on Jacques Cousteau's top 10 list of temperate dive sites, and it's amazing for snorkelers as well. So it is, as the name implies, a wall. It's a sheer cliff face that just plummets down, I don't know, 100 meters or more, and it is covered in life. There is not an inch of this wall that doesn't have something growing on it. This is what you see from the surface. This is not scuba diving. This is like I'm on the surface looking down. So anemones, red corals, tunicates, sponges, the whole wall is like this. So this is a really magical spot. You need a boat to get there, and probably not just a kayak, because it's about 20 kilometers out of Port Hardy, and the weather can sometimes be a bit gnarly. So this is best done with a dive charter. There are a couple in Port Hardy and Port McNeill, but if you love inter-tidal life, this should be on your life bucket list. But what about kayaking? So there is a really wonderful spot out of Port Hardy. So here's Port Hardy, here's Bear Cove, which is where the ferry leaves to go up to the north and central coast. So you can either launch as a launch in Port Hardy, or you can launch from the boat ramp here, and then you head up out of Hardy Bay, so this is all nice and protected, to this little cluster of islands, which is called the Masterman Islands. And there's just this beautiful little beach in here. Here it is. We actually took our Zodiac there rather than kayak, but it's only 3 or 4 kilometers. So again, eminently doable as a day trip. And the shores around all of these islands are just full of painted anemones, lots of sea stars, lots of good colors. Oops. So that is it. If you have been inspired and you want to know more, there's a really excellent Facebook group. It's not been around for very long, but already it's got 6,000 members. It's a very welcoming community. They organize outings, people post gear for sale, people post pictures of things that they've seen. So if you want to know more, if you want to find a snorkel buddy, you're going to find lots of like-minded people there. With that, I will say thank you very much and take any questions. Shall I moderate my own questions? Okay.
Do you snorkel alone?
Not normally. It's more fun with someone else, but it's also, of course, much safer. But if I am somewhere where I know very well and it's very protected, then sometimes I do go in by myself. But certainly when you're a beginner, it's good to go with someone. For sure.
And does that sort of wetsuit, does the buoyancy change as you're snorkeling for an hour? Not as a function of time, but when you dive down, your buoyancy changes because the suit gets compressed and your internal organs get compressed. So this idea of weighting yourself, the idea is that you become neutrally buoyant, which means you don't float, you don't sink, somewhere around the 5 to 10 meter mark. So the motivation behind this is that if you were to fall unconscious for any reason, you want to float back up to the top. Over long periods of time, like several years, if you're a serious free diver, they do change their buoyancy a bit because the plushiness, the cushiness goes out of them a bit, but not during the course of one swim.
Typically, how deep do you go and how long do you stay under?
I really don't like holding my breath, and I'm not very good at it either. So I do dive down, and probably I spend most of my time in the 3 to 5 meter range, which means I'm holding my breath for 20 seconds. Not long. As I say, I don't like that sensation very much.
Yeah, when you touch the fish eating anemone, does it actually hurt or is it just kind of like a weird tingling?
It's more like a tingle. Yeah, no, it's not. So it's not an ah. Yeah, no. But still, it's generally not a good idea to poke things. Despite what I said about tickling the leather star for the garlic, and we have neoprene gloves on anyway, so it's not like we can actually feel them. But yes, it's not painful. Yeah.
Did you take all those pictures yourself?
Yes. Actually, Mother Nature does all the hard work. I didn't bring my camera tonight, but it's like a point press. It's nothing big and fancy. The trick is learning how to stay still. Because when you're underwater, you might think that you're stationary, but there's always current moving, you're buoyant up and down. So learning how to kind of balance yourself for a second whilst you take the shot, that was the thing I had to learn. Yes?
Yeah, your two pieces wetsuit looks special. I'm curious about the price range for your two pieces. 7 million, right?
Yes, 7 mil, yeah.
Wetsuit.
Yeah. So if you are happy to shop online and to take a risk with the sizing, you can find them, you can buy in the US or in Europe for probably as little as about $300. A more typical price, if you go down to east to west, the sort of the low-end ones, it always really annoys me, the men's suits are cheaper than the women's suits. I don't know why. So the men's suits will start at about 400, the women's suits start at about 500, and then they go up from there. But there's also a second-hand market, so you can find them on Used Victoria or Marketplace. You can also rent them to try them as well. I will say I've probably done 200-300 dives in my wetsuit, and it's still going strong. So it's a good investment.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. Did you do any nighttime diving?
So for the bioluminescence, that's the main reason to go in at night. But there also are some critters that will kind of come out, and so squid are one example. They tend to come out
at night. During the day, I only ever see their eggs, big masses of squid eggs, particularly in there. So yes, you can certainly enjoy snorkeling at night as well. I think there's one more hand that just came up in the meantime. No, it's fine.
I was curious, are you ever worried about safety from boat traffic? Like, do you wear a bright floaty thing to alert people where you are?
So yes, you definitely have to be wary of boat traffic. In general, if you're snorkeling along the shoreline, the boats aren't coming in that close. But if you're ever doing a crossing, so for example at Saps Point, there's a couple of islands called the Gillingham Islands, which are about 100 meters swim, and the boats will cut through there to get to the marina. So yes, you definitely have to be careful. So having a buoy and swimming in a group, so that even when one of you's got your face in the water, someone else is looking up. Yes, you definitely have to be careful. The other hazards are not many, but fishing line. If you're at Ogden Point, I'm always looking out for fishing lines. So you should, one of the pieces of kit, I'm not going to dig it out, it's at the bottom of my rowing, is a knife. I've never had to use mine, but scuba divers and snorkelers, free divers almost always carry a dive knife. But that's pretty much it. Sea lions, I'm not a big fan of sea lions. I don't think they'd actually eat me. But they sometimes want to come and play, and they're really big. So that's the only other thing that I, personally ever feel worried about. Okay.
Any other questions?
Any issue with sea otters? Or not sea otters, but river otters?
Do I see sea otters?
Any issue with them?
Oh, any issue? They're pretty cheeky. I once had one come up to my face and then run. It was a bit freaky, but.
Sarah, those photographs were so incredible.
Yeah.
The next time I fall out of my kayak, I promise to keep my eyes open. Seriously, as a former diver, and I guess I still am a snorkeler, and I am a photographer, I am really impressed with your photography, especially when you told me that you use a point-and-shoot camera. I know Roger is an excellent photographer. I see his stuff posted all the time. You're as good as Roger.
Oh, that's not true.
Maybe Roger's as good as you are. I really want to thank you for coming, and this is a really good presentation. It's taught us an awful lot, and I hope there's some future interest. Just a word about wetsuits. The last time I bought a wetsuit, I tried on 3 different manufacturers. They're all large, and all 3 fit differently. Buy it online at your risk. We'd like to thank you by presenting you with our much sought after and seldom seen persistent mug. It's good for hot and cold, so enjoy it. It floats, I'm quite sure. If you're not tired of hearing me talk about Sarah's book, I had a copy of this for quite a while. It is a really interesting book, filled with what you've seen tonight, and Sarah's selling them, and they're on the back table, so if you're interested, and Christmas is coming, go talk to her. Our next speaker is on November 27th. Gail and I live in South Oak Bay, off McNeil Bay, near Trial Island, and for years I've been trying to get somebody from Trial Island to come and talk to us. I mean, we've all paddled around there quite a bit, and it's a really interesting place. But yet, the Friends of Tri Island never answer me back, and I'm not quite sure why. Anyways, recently, Matt Fairburn, who's the biologist and the chair of the Vireo Ecosystems Recovery Team, he's a PhD in, wrong paragraph, sorry. He's going to be speaking on November 27th on the ecological restoration of Trial Island. So that should be a pretty interesting talk. And maybe he knows somebody I can talk to. Anyways, thank you everyone. Thank you very much for tonight. Thank you for coming out. And if I don't see you on the water, hope to see you here next month. Have a safe trip home and drive carefully. Good night.